The first one that I wanted to, that challenge that I wanted to work around and talk about is voting. So that would be the first one, voting. This is an election year, and I got to watch my mouth because the things I want to say, I can't say. But you have two men, probably two main men that are going to be pretty soon running for president: Donald Trump and Joe Biden. That's my thinking. I think when it all boils down, you're going to have Donald Trump and you're going to have Joe Biden. And my view of it, I'm giving you this part of it. In my view of it, both of them are probably too old, too old to be running the country. I want to start off by asking you all: are you voting? Are you going to vote? And I'll give you this part. Last weekend we had the meeting, and I left a little bit early. Well, Jalen had told me, oh, probably a week prior, and I forgot about it, didn't know the time, but he had told me that Michael Eric Dyson was going to be, he was going to be in Akron, and he asked me if I wanted to go. I've read some of his books and the information. I've seen him on TV or on the news, especially when a racial issue comes up. He generally is. If it's a real big racial issue, you usually hear something from Michael Eric Dyson or Dr. Michael Eric Dyson. Let me correct that. He is a very, very intelligent man, has a lot of valuable information, wealth, all of that. I'm really impressed by him every time I hear him speak. Does everybody know who he is? Ah, okay, interesting. What I would say to you is you can go on YouTube and look him up and just kind of get familiar with his arguments he brings to the table when it comes down to race. It was interesting. Of course, I can't hear. So when I went, I got the latter part of it because I was in the meeting with everybody. And so I probably heard 30 to 45 minutes of what he was speaking about. I came in and tail end, so some of it was kind of hard for me to put together. But if I were to put it in my words, is like saying the Black problem, the issues that we have as Black people, and so to speak, our ailments and why. And when I say ailments, I'm not talking about just sickness. I'm talking about conditions that we have. He was really kind of talking in that area. And that's where my question really came in from voting. A part of it is that we've heard, as Black people, we've heard that Martin Luther King and those men, our forefathers, whatever, paved the way for us to vote. In other words, it gives you a feeling of if you don't vote, you're wasting their precious time and blood or whatever that they spent to get us to vote. So you have that perspective of it. So first of all, I want to ask, are you going to vote this year? And then the second question is, do you really feel like voting makes a difference? And if you do, explain how and why. So, are you going to vote this year, CJ?
I don't know. I haven't really thought about it.
Okay, so why are you uncertain? Would you generally vote in most situations? It's interesting to me. Why are you uncertain whether or not you're going to vote?
Yeah, I guess I don't really have much of a reason to. Last presidential election, I voted. And part of it was because I'd never voted before. I was kind of curious to see what the process was like. I don't think I'm so pessimistic about it, but I just don't really think that it is the effective means by which we make change.
Interesting. You may have to qualify that at some point in this conversation. Sherry, are you voting this year?
Yeah.
Do you generally vote?
Yep.
Okay. Why do you vote?
Because I think it might make a difference.
Because you think, okay, you may have to qualify that. All right. So, Star, are you voting this year?
If they send me a ballot in the mail, I'll fill it out, but I don't know that I'm gonna go out my way to go get it again.
Why? Have you ever voted?
I voted every time I've had the opportunity to vote before this election. This election, I think I just felt a little bit too busy. Usually I put a lot of research effort into what I'm going to vote. And I'm going to take the time to do it. And I don't feel like I have the energy to do that this year. I didn't even know it was an election year until probably you just said it anyway. So, yeah.
All right, Kayla, are you voting this year?
Probably not. Usually, like I think about, like I voted once before when I turned 18, but it's like usually I the best way to do it, or I feel the best way to do it is gather information about each candidate and each, everything that they believe in or whatever. But usually I think too, once it gets down to it, it's like I don't feel like dealing with the information. I don't feel motivated enough, and then there's too much like anxiety to try to, what am I gonna do, and I just don't do it.
Okay. Michael?
No, I'm not voting this year.
Have you ever voted before?
No.
How old are you?
I'm 25.
When you turned 18, you needed to start voting.
No, I don't believe that it, for one, I never liked politics. I never followed politics. So I never felt that I could make a decision anyways. And then I also don't believe that politics is the answer, because it's always hot or cold. There's no middle answer. There's no middle ground. So,
Man, y'all is jacked up. Every single one of them.
yeah.
Crystal, well, Sherry, she cool. Sherry cool. She gonna vote this year because she can make a difference. It can make a difference. Yeah, that's what Sherry said. So Sherry and the cool. The rest of y'all kind of iffy and jacked up. Jalen, are you voting this year?
I've never voted. Why? Okay, so first question, am I voting this year? No. I've never voted. Why have I never voted? A lot of people have said, most of it, that that's just not something that that's one of the things that I struggle with physically too, that it's like what you said, our ancestors fought and marched and did all these things for the right. We turn 18 and now we just throw it away, and I don't really look at it like that. Yeah, I have a lot to say that I can't say. So I have never voted. I'm not going to vote. And so that's where I'm at. I'm not with the cool kids.
Interesting. Randall, are you voting this year?
I might. I'm not sure. Number one, I think the difference that needs to be made is going to come from a collapse. So if I say, oh, I'm going to vote because I don't want it to collapse, but the collapse is the best thing going. If I vote, it is only to see somebody I don't like lose, not because it's going to make a difference.
Wow. Heather, are you voting this year?
I don't know if I will or not. I haven't really been following politics. I haven't been really following the news. I'm really not that interested. But
have you ever been interested? Has it ever been valuable to you?
I have voted. I mean, I have voted before, but to me, it's just the two sides of the same coin. You see a lot of things on TV that I think they're probably, these are friends. Some of these people are just friends. And so, you see there's a lot of things in the back room going on, that we don't see. And so I don't know. I think the best I can do is to pray, to me.
Okay. Nate, are you voting?
No, I'm definitely not gonna vote for sure. I haven't voted before. I don't plan on starting voting this year. I think that maybe Randall explained it the best. I think that the best thing that can happen is more so of a like collapse of everything that's already set in place. So voting seems like maybe honestly like a waste of time. If I do vote, it'll be like I can't remember who said it before, but I'm just a nosy person, so I kind of want to see what the process is like. But in terms of the outcome, I don't have any intention of voting.
All right. Before I say that, Davier, are you voting this year?
More than likely not. I have voted in 2 elections before, one with Obama, one between Trump and I think Hillary. I am with Randall and with Nate, I think, and with Heather. It's 2 sides of the same coin. I don't think that politics are the answers. I think that they provide bandages. I think it's all corrupt. For Black people, I feel like it's just best for us to mind our own business because all they do is emotionally manipulate people. And then they put somebody in office that they already control. I think the whole system is trash.
Amen.
Interesting. You know what? Yeah, I'm going to think I'm crazy for what I'm about to say, but I'm surprised. What I'm surprised about is that just about everybody in the group either feels like pretty much what's the use? There's no, I mean, I thought it was going to be more of you that were saying, yeah, I'm voting. And you would come up with a reason that, as to why you're voting. But the majority of this group, nobody's voting or they don't know if they are. It just, if something comes up that really is important to them, they might vote. And we pretty much said that most of us pretty much said LaShera is the only one that said she feels like voting can bring about a change. Sherry, why do you feel that voting can bring about a change?
Okay, I'm looking at something different. It's crazy, but I knew Obama was going to be elected. I knew Bush was, and I knew Trump was. And so because I knew that down to my core, I went and voted for them. But I agree with the system needs to crash.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, if people aren't voting, will we really know if it really does work? You know what I'm saying? Like for instance, in your state, they voted to keep abortions legal, right, or something, and it, a lot of people came out and voted, so it showed that it does work if enough people vote, but I don't know if that made sense. I don't know. I haven't gotten anything about who's going to win this year, and I have a feeling that the reason they don't want Biden to win is because if he does die, Kamala is going to become president. I mean, if you vote for Biden, we'd have a female president. So that sounds good to me.
Well, okay, let's just, that's a factor, but in that one point, which steps away from the point of the conversation, but it's okay. I kind of want to play with that a little bit. Does anybody in this group have a problem with a female president?
I think that this is kind of where I don't feel that voting helps. What I'm saying is that what I've seen in politics is that you get something that is not like even a question, I guess. So it's like, I don't care who's leading if they're capable of leading. And so the argument against is that, well, we've only had men president. So I'm saying that naturally, it's not a woman's job to be a leader or the head of something, whether it's the president of the United States or not. You know what I mean? But it's not about that for me, if that makes sense, because again, it's like a woman being president is not a problem if she's the most capable person that we have in order to lead the system that we have. You know what I mean? But again, it starts to get into things that it's almost like you pass a law or you say something just so you can go against it, and it doesn't. It's not for me like even a question where it's like, you know what I mean? Like it wouldn't matter man or woman, but if things are as they should be, it wouldn't be a woman, not because she's not capable, but because that's not where her place is. And it's not some negative patriarchal stay in the house and cook dinner.
Interesting.
I'm not for a female president. Part of the reason, though, is because of where we are with identity politics. I feel like people they vote for frivolous reasons. So I think that people would vote for a female president, given the climate that we're in, for like a win for feminism, and not really to snuff out, is she qualified? And we don't even have the space right now to really qualify people without you being accused of being sexist, racist. So I don't think that it's ideal right now. I don't feel like we need a female president. I think we feel like we need one just to soothe ourselves. But I don't think that we would intelligently vote a female into office because we would do it from the wrong place. And I'm with Jalen as far as like, I don't think that that's necessarily our place, but I don't feel it in the same way of like, women just need to sit down, be quiet. And she was like, that's a big responsibility. And I think that women are capable of leading in general, but I think that the office of the president of the United States is so entirely corrupt. I wouldn't even want a woman to be in that position. And if Biden dies, I ain't trying to have Kamala up here. I ain't even gonna lie.
So, Daria, you're saying though that in other sense, you're also saying that I don't have a problem. I don't see nothing wrong with women in leadership or a woman president, but the present conditions are the reason why you don't feel like it's a good time for her.
Yeah, that's part of it. But I also think that even if we weren't in the cultural climate that we're in now, and if things were more in order, I don't even think we would feel the need to have a female president.
I agree with you, Daria. I want to make. So I think, but you're shooting at I agree with that point. You're shooting at the top of the point. You're shooting at, I don't know how to say it, the top of it. When you say that if things were in the right place, there would not be a need. Does everybody agree with that? Do you think, because what this raises up, what Daria just said, that last part, what it raises up is, I'm using this as an example. I'll be discreet with this part. Somebody had mentioned to Jalen that they asked him a question. And the question that they asked Jalen was something like, my way of saying it is, how do you see male and female? And what is was it gender? Yeah, it was basically, if I didn't think that gender was a spectrum, that there was no definitives. Do you understand what he's saying?
Did you say if you didn't think gender was a spectrum, there would be no difference?
That there would be there's no need to further a relationship because we're not on the same page. So it was almost what Darvia was just talking about with the state that we're in, our climate, our identity crisis. It was almost like, again, if you don't just accept that if I say I'm a starfish, you have to accept and bend to me being a starfish. Almost that thing, that gender is more an expression of who I am. It's not, there's no definitives of what gender is. Do you understand what he says? It's a common thing right now. What he's describing is the past generations looked at it as
There is male, there's female. Here's the male role, here's the female role. This is an example. Where it is today in the generation thing is there is no role. There is no male role or female role. They're equal. That's a way of saying it. Is that correct, Beth? Or how would you say it?
It's not just that they're equal, but it's like the lines have to be, they're blurred to define male or female. There's no male and there's no female, not just roles.
Right. Okay. So what it does, this will help you all understand. What it does is when it comes down to what she really asked is, it's like saying, what's your sexual orientation? If you say my sexual orientation is heterosexual male, then they'll push away from you and basically say that we can't have a relationship. Why? Because that's the old generation's way of looking at it. And they're saying that whether you have something between your legs or not doesn't define you as a man or doesn't define you as a woman. It's what you prefer and what you desire to be that defines you as a man or a woman, even if you have different parts or the parts that you carry. That's where it is today. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. We live in Chicago. It's a very liberal, progressive city, politically, socially. And so it's very normal. And I work at a school where these ideas are pushed and encouraged.
Yes.
Basically, you can be, if you are a man, if you feel you're a man. You are a woman if you feel you are a woman. You are neither or non-binary if you don't resonate with either one. And then there are even things outside of that when you start getting into pronouns and whatnot. They thought that they were helping by being able to establish freedom of expression and you having the option of being non-binary. But what you also find in this conversation is people saying, well, I'm a masculine presenting woman. So it's strange because there's still some idea or picture of what is masculine or what is feminine. But the idea is you can aspire to be whichever one you would like to be. It just depends on how you feel.
And the point that Darvier is making, to me, ties into what I feel is the danger in making laws out of things. So trying to define in a law what a man is or what a woman is, from the traditional sense or in the books, it puts it up for grabs in legislation for people to vote against it or rewrite it or whatever. And I think it takes away from the, for lack of a better word, sanctity of what God had in mind when he created.
Did everybody understand, Crystal? I need to understand what you understood Crystal to say. The reason why I'm asking is because there are some powerful, deep points, but I don't know if it's going over. Darvier's brought out some good points. Crystal just brought out a point. I don't know if it's going in one ear and out the other. I'm trying to see if you really are seeing what we're saying. We understand this is what we're saying.
In one sense, things like identity and how you have to, in essence, vote it into law to make it true, right? So right now, where's the proof that you are a man or proof that you're the woman? Where's the proof? Where's the truth in it? Where are the lines drawn? These are silent points or finer details that, in essence, it's not completely understandable, or it doesn't really go along with the full picture of if none of us were taken advantage of, oppressed, whatever any of these bad things that have happened, you wouldn't have people battling and fighting over something that seems insignificant to the bigger picture. We should be able to make a lot more strides in a better direction instead of fighting over these minute details that blur the lines too much.
Crystal and I had talked a little bit about it earlier today, but one of the key points that really stuck into my mind that Crystal really brings up is what is happening is because generations or our generation or the older generation defined certain things that they should not have defined. This is the cause of the present generation trying to undo that. The simple form of what she's saying is the past generations defined some things that they should not define. So the present generation is trying to correct it with this view. Is that correct, Crystal?
Yeah, in a nutshell, another example that might make it a little clearer, when the Congress and all them were trying to pass the law to define marriage as being between one man and one woman, when they put that into law, that put it up for grabs for people to say that law is not right, that law is not fair, that law takes away my rights. But they didn't have the ability to destroy what God had set from the beginning until they made it a law. So they tried to put something that is divine on a regular level, and that is what gives everybody the right to then say, well, that ain't right, that's not fair, that you're taking away my rights, you're taking so that's the danger in the political part of society and politics in general. It can appear like it's designed to do something to help you, but it's really not.
What are you hearing, Star?
When she at first described it, that's what I heard, is that man was trying to undo what God put in place. We're trying to go outside of the parameters that he put for us. I even thought about how we're destroying the planet he put us on. And so we're trying to go to Mars, but you can't survive in Mars. So all the form boards that he's put on, in place for us, we're like, please, let's just put them to the side and do something else. And it doesn't work, and it's not sustainable, and it's not healthy. And you're ignoring the actual issue. If people are feeling like, oh, I'm not a man, I'm not a woman, or I don't understand my role, you have to work within that and fix that issue. But instead of fixing the issue, we're paying them off with laws and, oh, just go do whatever you want to do. Okay, fine. You don't have to hide in the closet. You can do it over here.
One way when I first started running into this was when I was in the Church of God. When I was in the CRG, I ran into it. And the argument, most of you have heard me talk about it before, was whether or not women should be pastors or not, or whether or not women should, and this is challenging for some of you, whether or not women should be pastors or not. The argument really was because they were women or whatever, God did not make women to be leaders like that. He did not make them to really be pastors. And there was an undercurrent in the COG of this, but they never fully concluded the balance or the right of that. So sometimes in the COG, they accepted women preachers, but they tried to discourage as much as possible women pastors. This is in the undercurrent of the COG. It's in the undercurrent. And so I ran into this because I ran into some brothers that were bold enough to tell me that they didn't feel like women should be pastors. There was a strong feeling of that, and especially among a certain amount of Blacks, which is interesting. It seemed to be in the white congregations, they had some white women pastors, But generally what you saw was they were marginalized. Can you agree with that? Heather, could you agree with that? Could you agree that white women pastors were marginalized? I couldn't stop them, but they had a way of saying, okay, and pushing you a little corner, we'll give you this little spot, but you don't really have that much. We're not going to regard what you say as if when a man is really dealing with this problem or talking about it.
Yeah, I agree. I agree.
So this is where the first place that I started running into it. I'm just going to speed it up a little bit. The point that Daria somewhat touched on, the point that Crystal brought out, is that you have heard me use this term before. There are silent points. Daria brought it out by saying that if things were in its healthy state, naturally, you would not have women in this position. Did you hear me? If things are in its healthy state, you would not have women in this position. If things are in a healthy state, it would not even be the desire of a woman to take that position. But it's the fact that things are in an unhealthy state that causes all of these things to happen the way that it is. Is that clear? Do you agree with that or disagree with that? The answer, this is not to put anybody on the spot or anything, but the answer, if you were saying, I disagree with that, then it would say, in essence, I agree with today's present ideology.
I agree because it said that woman was designed or created to be a help. And it's always stated her position as being powerful as a support. So that's why I would agree.
So when we read the Bible and it said that the woman is supposed to be the helpmeet of the man, the way I'm going to Crystal's point, the way that was projected or portrayed was that the woman was secondary to the man, and she was there to support him in a certain way. But what was the scripture really referring to when it said help me? And we don't have to go through all of the details and spend a lot of time on that. What I'm trying to say is that there were some things that were defined here. That help me means that women are supposed to do this, this, and this. And because it was defined that way, it crystallized into unhealthiness. They defined women as being a helpmeet, but the way that they defined it, it crystallized into being unhealthiness. So that's just one little point. This part that I'm reading may not seem to connect, but I'm going to read about. This book is by Michael Eric Dyson, and it's called What Truth Sounds Like. And this part is interesting. What's interesting to me that we're talking about. First of all, we said that most of us said that we don't believe voting. The reason why we're really not voting or we're uncertain about voting is because we don't really know. Some people have concluded it does not bring about change. And some of you have not fully concluded that it doesn't bring about change, but you are saying, I'm not sure that it's really going to make a difference. All right, now, this is starting in the middle, and you have to just listen and pick up on it. Somehow, Bobby Kennedy and Jimmy Baldwin, I don't know if you all are familiar with James Baldwin or Jimmy Baldwin, seemed fated to end up in a room to hash out their contrasting, at times complementary views of the world. fate played a large role in Kennedy's life. He was the third of 4 boys in a family of 9 children. And if birth order has any meaning, then Bobby's later arrival and his slighter stature weighed on him his entire life. As a runt, he was less confident than his older brother, Joseph Jr., a war hero who perished in World War II on a top secret mission, and John, who inherited from his older brother their father's wish that he become president, which he did, but not before becoming a war hero too, and a congressman and senator. Bobby was forever in their shadows. The younger Kennedy fought hard to overcome a lonely childhood in which he felt invisible and inferior, and at times isolated and excluded. The teeming despair of his early years would prove essential to Kennedy finally grasping, however tentatively, the way American apartheid punished Black children and their families. You understand what I read in the last part? I don't know if you connected. I'll read that part again. The teeming despair of his early years would prove essential to Kennedy finally grasping, however tentatively, the way American apartheid punished Black children and their families. So what that last part is really saying is because Bobby Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, had gone through certain experiences of feeling isolated, all of those kind of things, it played a major part in him understanding American apartheid punished Black children and their families. So he's white, but the fact that he had been marginalized or whatever, or he felt that he was pushed aside or isolated, all of those things played a part in him understanding the plight of Black people. Does that make sense? That's a short way of saying it. Let me read on. What Bobby lacked in social stature and physical gifts, he compensated for in terms of a daring do that teetered from raw courage to reckless endeavor. He took readily to an existentialist creed of molding one's life out of the materials of the given time and space of one's day while clinging tenaciously to a Catholic faith in the Almighty, a faith put constantly in peril by the tragedies of the human plight. Even when Bobby was feeble-handed or anxious in the teeth of the overwhelming gravity of his duties, he trusts forward in the belief that although his path may have been predetermined, it would not continue without his input, without his Herculean efforts to bend the curve of events in his favor, or at least the favor of those he served. Service was for him the price he willingly, lovingly paid for his position at home, where he catered to his imperious father, and subsequently in politics, where he served his commanding president brother, Jack, as Attorney General. Bobby had remarkable courage and persistence, and he was not afraid to grow. Some of the change was dramatic. After being a loyal apologist for Joe McCarthy in the 50s, he developed a tough-minded empathy for the genuinely less fortunate in the 60s. He eventually became a man that the masses could identify with. His appeal was wide. He was beloved by the dusty, impoverished stalwarts of Appalachia, as well as by the desperately poor of the inner city. All right, I'm going to stop there. So it goes through a little bit of Bobby Kennedy's experience, just a little portion of his life. The next part will go into James Baldwin and his life, the experience that he had, and is bringing together how these two men came together and had a discussion and the profound impact that that discussion had on Bobby Kennedy. Now, you have to understand that Bobby Kennedy, I'm going to give you a little information. Bobby Kennedy is the Attorney General. His brother is the President. Let me give you a little information here. The issue at this time, a high issue at this time, is race and the experiences that the Black people are really going through. A segregation, murder, killing, all of that, being marginalized, all of those things are very strong and present at this time. And so John Kennedy, if you're read on, it's kind of interesting. John Kennedy, the president, was straddling the fence on the issues. He had to appeal to those in the South, the Southern people, which we understand North versus South. Northern, the North pretty much were free states during slavery, all of that. Different states of the North were free states. The Southern was the slave owners and all of those kind of things. So in short, most of the South that he was dealing with was for segregation. Most of the South was for that, all of those particular things. And so, but they had money, they had different things like that. So he had to appeal to them oftentimes. And it's kind of typical of how our politics works today. When you have a president pretty much, and he can be a Democratic president, he's going to be blocked by different points that the Republicans are basically doing. They're against him, they're fighting against him. And so in order to win him over, he has to give in certain things. He has to let go of certain things. He has to say, okay, here's a problem right here. Blacks are not being treated right, but I can't address it in order to win over these people. That's what's happening. That's what's happening in this particular situation. And so, make a long story short, one of the points that I was getting to, we talk about voting not working. And what I was going to describe is providence. Heather said something, and what she shared was maybe not voting, but she would just pray. Now, I'm not. Some of you know how I feel about prayer. Some of you know that I believe that just praying for something, the words of prayer, asking God to do something, does far less or has far less impact or bring far less change than action. I believe that prayer is an action more than it is words. Prayer has to do with more of how I sacrifice my life or sacrifice things to bring about change than it does words to bring about change or requests of God to bring about change. I think that the request that we make of God is more of a request when it is an action than it is me just asking. So, she said something else. Heather said something very interesting. This is not directed at Heather. This is trying to make a point. So, I'm talking about providence. I'm jumping ahead now. We cannot, what I'm saying is God moved things in a direction in Bobby's life to where he experienced the things that he experienced. Those things that Bobby experienced caused him to think in a certain way. And so he had a softer heart toward the weak or the misfortuned. And it had to do with his experience. And so this is what I was trying to say, Star. That's the part that I was trying to say. But this is the hand of God. And he understands, God understands the Black plight. He understands this is what they're going through. So he thinks ahead and he says, I'm going to allow things to go through a certain experience to prepare them for this particular moment. That is Bobby Kennedy. Now, there's a difference between Bobby and John. John is more concerned about his biggest issue during his whole presidency was communism. His main point, the main thing, but when it came down to the Black and what was happening, he was either oblivious of it or ignored it. It was Bobby Kennedy, the general attorney, that allowed James Baldwin to sit, a Black man, to sit and have a conversation with him, and he listened and heard him. John would have never done it. It would have affected his presidency. And that conversation put Bobby under fire, and he was the one that was constantly addressing the issues, the present issues at that time that Blacks were experiencing. And he had to push his brother in that direction, in essence. They didn't always agree. Are you following me? So I'm describing to some degree providence. I mean, and when you put that in prayer, I'm describing that God created this moment for this time, for this experience of Bobby's experience, the negatives that he experienced, but he has a purpose for it. And he allows John to become president, but John is he's really affectionate. John Kennedy, at one point, when he first became president, he was on a boat, just a pleasure boat, and they called him and said, your wife is in the hospital. She was pregnant, I think. She was going to have a baby. He nearly didn't even have a response to it. He didn't try to fly back home. He didn't try to, okay. He just very affectionate. So he's a very affectionate man, not intimate. When you get to Bobby, he is way more intimate than John. So I'm trying to really describe that. So in short, the point that I want to make, I don't know if you can get it from this point, because I don't know if I painted a good enough picture. The point that I want to make is this, that it is not voting that brings about change. It's knowing God and his timing and being in the right place of his timing. That's the point that I'm hammering. It's knowing his timing. And when I talked to Chauncey and Chris about it, they gave a better illustration of this and how their views of voting and all of that, it helped bring the point out better. But it's really understanding his timing. So what I'm saying is, if God had prepared Bobby for this moment to address particular issues. If Black people are not in, that's God's timing. I want this man to address it. So I allowed him to experience all of this. And now I have him ready. Then on the people that are servants of God, they must understand that this is the particular time that God is moving to address, and they have to move forward offensively in order for change to meet. If they don't know this is how God moved in this situation for this particular time, and they don't move offensively, then change will not occur. Did you understand? Did you understand what I said? Then change will not occur. This is what makes prayer ineffective. So the Bible is structured. And so when you get to the New Testament, you hear Jesus talking about they wanted signs and wonders. And he started saying, one place he said, unless he said something about the sign of Jonas, talking about Jonah. Now, there's no more sign. Okay. So I'm helping you understand something here. The Sabbath, all of those things were how they were supposed to understand what was coming next. They were supposed to understand how he's moving at this time. Let me give you another fired example. COVID just came by, and it just wiped out certain people. I said before, using this, I'm doing this so that you get the picture, using Moses, and when the death angel came through, notice it calls it death angel. Who sent the death angel through? Who sent it? Was it just something that just occurred like COVID? That all of a sudden it was supposed to start up in China and it spread, and this is just life? Or is God behind it? Which one do you say? Is God behind COVID? Did we understand where God was moving at the time so that we can take advantage of it? Because if you don't, change will not occur. Do you understand? Are you following me? This is how you are effective. So you cannot be effective if you don't understand how God is moving. No matter what you pray, if you understand where he is today and the issues we have today, if you understand where he is and the things that he put in place to counter certain things, and you move offensively, then it will work. But if you're sitting your ass down and sitting still when he had set these things in place, you will not bring about change. That is how real change occurred. And during the time of Bobby Kennedy, it put something in place, but the pieces, Martin Luther King and them understood, and they moved in that direction offensively, knowing now is the time. Because they understood where God was at that moment. You had a woman that stabbed Martin Luther King, who did not know where God was at that moment. That's proving she didn't know. Are you following me? So that is how real change works. So when I was saying, when the death angel came through, it's called death angel. That word angel means servant of God. It's not talking about a flapping wing something flying through the air just and causing death. It's calling whatever sickness that occurred at that time as an angel, a minister of God. The sickness, COVID, being a minister of God. Are you following me? Another place I've said before where God says that this king was my anointed. It was either King Cyrus or Darius. He was a man that sacrificed children to fire, all of those. He was a very evil man, but he was called an anointed of God because he allowed the temple to be built at that present time. That's the only reason why. So I'm showing you the structure of what I'm saying, that's God's movement. He had prepared King Cyrus just as he prepared Bobby Kennedy, and as things move in the direction, as he prepares this thing over here, he also prepares a people to move offensively. It takes both things to bring about change. If you move offensively without it being prepared, it doesn't work. And if you prepared something, you need to know this is the season for this particular thing and move in that direction. That's a vast picture. But this vast picture starts when we are adolescents, when we are babies or children. You learn this when you are a child. You learn to read where God is and the movements from 3 on up to 12 years old. You study how he's moving. And so now every time there's an event, negative event, they understand he just did this. God did this. That was God. He did this. That means that is my cue to do this. Do you understand? We are far away from understanding that. And the farther you're away from that, the more decay occurs. Occurs. All right, I'll stop there. I can say a lot more. What do y'all think? What do you hear? What are your challenges to that?
If you don't get the training, you don't study up to understand the movements from 3 to 12, what would be the course to get that understanding? Because right now, what I would see is 2 bad president options. After the last election was also 2 bad president options, and the election before that was 2 bad president options. Like, it's been for a while. That's what people saw. It's not, it was just picking the lesser of 2 evils, and nothing's changed, like you said.
I got the last part of it. That yes, of course, I don't believe in the lesser of 2 evils. I think you said that in the beginning. I think that both are. I think that if what you do is vote a Republican in office, does voting bring about change? So then you get people, this is where Sherry was, you get people who are basically going to say, look, if we had more conservative people, they would vote against gays in the military. This is what Crystal's point too comes up. We vote against gays in the military. We vote against gay marriage. We would vote against all of these things, And that's how you bring about change. Then you have the Democrats that say, we vote against this, how you handle people. We vote against moral issues. We vote against, I call them moral issues. We vote against how people are being treated unfairly, whatever, all of these kind of things. And you have both sides doing that. In short, when we vote against and pass laws, this is Crystal's point, when we pass laws to stop homosexuality, it increases it. It builds a momentum from the other side to oppose. And it increases it. How we got to transgender today has to do with it multiplying itself because of our politics. If you really trace it, you will see that our politics, they really work together. On one hand, you would have the Democrats that have a point. They both have a point. The point is, one says homosexuality is wrong. They have a point. That's the Republican side. The Democrat side says, leave it alone. Let people be people, because if you don't try to force them into something, and they're right, you can't force it. But neither side has found the balance. And so on the Democrat side, it looks like they don't do anything. They just say, well, if this is what your choice is to be, homosexual, so be it. It's wonderful. We are about fairness. And it's unfair not to allow two men to get married. It's inequality. A Democrat, not all, both sides go into moderate Democrat. Some go into it goes from extremely loyal, can't even think of the word. It goes into Republicans extremely conservative, all the way to moderate, to some that are very liberal, in essence Republican. And Democrat goes from liberal to conservative. Both have liberal to conservative in their structure. What's placed on the Democratic side is issues like abortion. They're for abortion. They're for the woman's right. Women should have the right to choose. You can't, this is an issue. They have a right to choose. And then we go through all of these arguments of why they should have a right if they get an abortion. If a person that's been raped, they should be able to have a right. I've heard those arguments on down the line. But the side of that falls really in the area of, it turns out to be just accept these things as right and normal. Does that make sense? Did that make sense?
It made sense. It sounds a whole lot like, again, we're paying off our crimes, because instead of actually fixing the issues of why the woman is raped, or why the man wants to be woman wants to be a transgender, or, all of those issues, we're just gonna make a way for it to work in our society rather than fix the issue, not plugging up the main hole again.
Yeah, I'm trying to condense it because there's a lot that came to mind when you were sharing. The first, when you were talking about providence, and there are many examples of it, you mentioned one of the examples with King Cyrus, but it made me think of the story of Joseph. So first, starting with the story of Joseph, of course, and specifically in one of the last verses in Genesis, before we move into Exodus, and and the and the story of Moses is where Joseph basically says, what you meant for evil, God did for good. And also, when you were talking about timing, and the experiences that Joseph went through, grooming him to act in that time. And then, of course, you mentioned the death angel in Exodus. It also made me think of even Pharaoh and the Egyptian leaders at that time, their fear at the growing nation, at the Israelites, and what that also caused, that being God's providence. I think one thing that has been on my mind, you've talked about blacks being called, why that God had a reason for calling blacks through slavery, as you say. And one tie-in that I have been thinking about during this conversation is when you said action versus simply what we say, simply what we speak. Because when you talk about God calling us through slavery, there is, if we truly understand that, it is shown more by how we act versus us, even as we are processing through the negative side of slavery was bad. We have this positive image, but we still, I'm talking for myself, I still don't, or I'm still coming to the understanding of that substance and what that experience is supposed to bring out in me, how I should be acting. So that is one thing, and my phone's about to die. But the other thing that it made me think of is when we were talking about law, and I don't know if you want to share about this, but it made me think of perfect law. And I can't really condense this down, but it made me think generally and specifically. So when James is talking about that in James, one of the things that he mentions more from, in one sense, it could be individual, but he talks about, and I can read the verse, but he talks about when we are hearers and not doers, or when we have those unnatural laws that in one sense give us the flexibility to say that we believe something or say this is what I stand for, but the true nature of our action and our heart there's a discrepancy there. So and in one of the verses he talks about, it can be like a mirror where a man sees his natural face but then walks away forgetting what he actually looks like. And I think that's what our laws, whether they're within our political system or within our churches, that's what those laws allow for us. And that's at the end of that chapter is when he defines what true religion is. My last point, which is a very small one, even in the roles of women or the nature of women, the nature of man and woman is something that I have been trying to talk less about, and just the words, because I think that there's a lot that's missed. And one of my small pet peeves is when people take a certain type of value off of simply, it's just what they say. You can say, oh, I'm for heterosexual marriage, or I'm for women's rights. It's just the surface of it. and where there can be a certain amount of value that you get from taking that stance or belonging to a particular group, but your true understanding or your true behavior does not align. There's still, even for people with good intentions, is a point of maturing into an understanding of something. So that's something that I'm maturing into. And within that, even with talking about women and leaders, is if I don't understand God's timing, I could also say from that point, women should not be in leadership, misunderstand when it is appropriate. So my mind went to the story of King of Judah and Tamar. My mind went to Esther. My mind went to Deborah, and instances in which, if we are simply thinking about the surface of something, we also miss out in someone acting within God's timing to bring about change and to correct something that is out of balance or unhealthy.
Powerful, CJ. Then what you said that about women, that is 100% correct. God grooms men and women through their experiences for special times and moments. It does not necessarily have to distinguish, but he understands this thing is only going to change if this woman does this. The story of Deborah, whatever y'all want to call it. Baby don't like Deborah. I'm about to get a whooping. So, and it almost plays out that way, the way CJ really, she was made for that moment. And God knew that it was going to be a lull in men at that time because of the circumstances, but she had been prepared for that moment. Esther, the story is really talking about how Mordecai or whatever his name was, her uncle really told her, you were groomed for this moment. That's what he's telling her. He's telling her and she was saying, but if I go before the king, he's going to kill me. And he's saying, no, you were groomed for this moment that God, without you knowing or anything, had prepared you to do this particular thing. If you don't act offensively on this particular point, the value of or the race of Jews would be slaughtered. And he had prepared a woman to address this issue, and only a woman could address it. So it does not distinguish the way that we distinguish it, or church distinguishes it. But what happens is, once it's corrected, you would really see women go back to their normal. Everything's fine now. I don't need to defend or protect. I don't need everything's going smooth. And they would naturally go back to their natural position. CJ, to me, really brought some of that in my mind, brought that up. But you made some very solid points. Go ahead.
I was just going to say thank you for clarifying that. As I mentioned, my phone's about to die, but I don't know if you read it in the group chat, but you've also talked about Rosa Parks. When you talk about the civil rights movement, you've also talked about Rosa Parks in the same sort of aspect.
Mm-hmm. So what comes to my mind is it was all white men that created the political system to begin with. When is it time for a woman to step in and change that?
You have a very powerful point. In my conversation with Chauncey and Christo, and what I concluded is that voting against homosexuality, voting against any of those things is not going to do anything but make it worse. So what do we have to challenge? Now, if y'all post this up on YouTube or something, I'm going to have a whole bunch of people with white hats at my house with a cross in my yard. They're fighting, I'm going to be nice, an ideology. This is what we talked about like the last week or so when we had men's meeting. You're fighting an ideology. God placed in every race something that he intended to be unique, that was supposed to remain intact, that was going to be different than any other race. He did every race like that. He did not intend for them to be the same, just like your fingerprints. But what happens is when one ideology, racial ideology, places and overpowers that thing that God intended to stay in this race, and you make that race ideology become as the dominant, what's dominant? What would happen is it would begin to cause the race that has been changed to deteriorate. So that's what I was telling you when I said Brother Fuller had wrote his dissertation on this. And his dissertation was about Honduras and how the island of Rotan was predominantly Black. What began to happen is the Spanish from the mainland began to move unto the island of Rotan. As they moved in and they became the dominant race on the island, they changed the education system to the Spanish education system. What you saw over the years is a decrease in the race of Blacks on the island of Rotan. And it wasn't because they were moving. It was because they either went on drugs, they either shot and killed each other, they either went into poverty and all of it. And what he wrote in his dissertation, he said the only way to change it is to bring them back to their national language and ideology. Other than that, it will decay, that race. When we were in the COG, the reason why the split, the arguments that Blacks have, I was in the meeting, and what they were really pointing at was that we did what was told us to do, what was right that was told us to do, that you said it was right. And over the years, we saw a decrease in our family. This is what was said, our children. And it was a decrease. And you didn't see the same level of decrease on the white side. I'm not saying it in a negative way. You didn't see the same decrease because it was an ideology, that it was their ideology. And when you placed it on Blacks, what happened was it began to cause congregations to shrink that ideology. And it caused them to shrink. It caused the children to dissipate. It caused all kind of things. And this is 2010 minister meeting. They were really pointing at the reason why we are now taking a stand the way that we are is to protect the rest of us, our value. Because if you take the language of a race, and you change the name of a race, and you take the land of a race, you remove all of who he is. He will never find himself, and he will operate under the guise of what you tell him he is, rather than what he really is. Sherry's point. The political system really is an white ideology. It is not, it's itself has it, the political system in itself is discriminatory. You can join and be a part and join in with it. And you'll get a token for your efforts. That's a way of saying it. So no matter how you vote, all of those kind of things doesn't really bring about change. What really brings about the change is understanding where God is in this time and moment and how he is moving and taking advantage of how he is moving.
I want to share something real quick. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I think that two things that you said really stand out to me. The first thing being learning something from the past generation. If you have an ideology that separates you from the decisions that was made before you, like you said something key of we did everything that you were supposed us to do. We did everything that we were supposed to do, and it caused decay in us in a way that it didn't cause decay in you. And I think that idea is pretty much saying like, looking at generations as like a whole, the things that the generations before us didn't get wrong is just as important for us to have that information to get it right, to make something, to continue it and I guess take that information and do the right thing. But it's not necessarily like, it doesn't feel like flowers all the time. It feels like, I've seen what you guys did, and that's clearly not working for you. So we're going to make a decision. But when you understand that process and kind of respect the process in a whole, it feels like something that needs to happen, something that needed to happen. You guys needed to get this wrong so that we can get it right. And it makes you look at the situation completely different, right? I mean, it doesn't make you look at like the mistakes of your parents or maybe grandparents or great grandparents or even their ideology. It doesn't make you look at that and kind of victimize it, but it makes you understand how important that process was, as right or as wrong as it could be. It makes you understand like how important that process is for us to be able to stand where we are today. It's not just important if they got it right, so now that we get it right. You know what I'm saying? It's more so important, regardless of whatever that process is. It's like, it's darn near like you can't make the decisions that you make now without having that a part of like the story. And then the second thing that really stood out to me was that's like a tough pill to swallow in terms of like I understand why. Well, I can come to the understanding of why a woman would say like it's important that we have someone in this role in terms of if you take into consideration how women have been treated over the years, or even where they are currently now with the mishandling and understanding like, no, there are some things that wasn't explored and I feel safe or I feel unsafe. And it's time for me to make a decision about that. But what that says to me is like how important it is to have people around you to maintain a system that allows you to do one thing or another. That's so important. And that seems almost impossible. Even if we all try to, all of us in this group try our hardest to reflect standard, right? We're going to fall short in a lot of different ways. And that's like a domino effect 24/7 in terms of reactions. And I feel this way, or this plays into where I still need to grow, and this plays in where you need to grow. Like, it's such a balance. If there's only one way to make everybody, I guess, act right, that seems almost scary a little bit, but it's very important for like to sustain a certain way of living. The people that you have around you all kind of challenging each other to get to a place to where you all believe the same thing, not for the sake of believing something or just saying that you all believe the same thing, but for the sake of like, now we can live the way we were always intended to live, right? Because whatever you do, it makes me feel a certain way, or it's either gonna spin off into something super, super negative with me. And now I want to do something that I shouldn't want to do because of the decisions that you made. You know what I'm saying? So that's why it's super hard to like look at a system that wasn't designed for us and say, I'm going to be a part of this. Because I know for a fact that whoever designed the system has no interest on doing the right thing. That has everything to do with what role I play, the decisions I make, how that makes me feel. And that's just kind of like it's a hard pill to swallow of how like one little thing can throw off the balance of everything. I don't know. That's just something that I was thinking about.
Interesting. So, someone, or Nate, you can do it since you were saying it. Give me, just condense down the part that you're saying is a hard pill to swallow.
To say it in short, or to be more specific, right? If I'll use the man and woman example. If over the years a woman hasn't been treated right by a man, or they say, hey, you're just a helpmate, and it's never explored what that looks like realistically, then that would cause unhealthy natures in a woman to say, now I want to fill in the blank with something unhealthy. So the only way a woman can exist the way a woman should exist is if a man exists the way a man was intended to exist. And if that's ever any balance between the two, then there's going to be a breakdown one way or another. That's what makes it feel kind of scary. You know, it's like it's more stakes for me to do what I need to do because I know that we're all interconnected in a way.
Okay, that's interesting. Part of it, and I don't know if you'll connect this, but part of what you said, that last part that you said, or you repeated, Nate. Again, I don't know how to do this. I just I shared with Bev about it yesterday. Part of where my mind is when you say that, I think CJ picks up on it. Usually when we have these kind of conversations is language. We oftentimes look at language as words. That's what we understand mostly. Language is a way, it's an expression, but we use words the most to express it. Of course, we understand there's body language, things like that. There's a language of the universe, the way that things are reacting. But when we understand language, a simple form of it is what I'm really saying, how things move. Randall and Sherry, when they first got into this, they would call it vibrations. But they were really, when they're talking about vibrations, they're really talking about a language, something that is moving, because all language has to do with how things are moving. When you said that, what I'm teaching, this is deeper Hebrew. So you would say, what is the language of the woman? Meaning, if a woman is out of place, what is the language of that? If a child is acting the wrong way, what is the language of that? The language would not be saying the child needs to be beat. It's saying the language is pointing at this, there was a failure over here that is causing this to be in this state. That's the language. That's the real language. Or what you can look at is a symptom or a present problem, and you can make it a language. So what happens in our voting system when we're talking about removing gay and we're voting against gay rights, they're addressing the symptom and not the language. Because gay is a language that is pointing at this needs to change right here. So when you said that, it may not, you may not connect it, but when you said that, that's a part of what I would say is you're talking about when you said tough pill to swallow. It's real tough. It's tougher. It stops being as tough when you understand it from a language perspective. It really helps you when you see it from this is a language, this is expressing, it's really saying this is out of order. So if you watch the structure of what I said, if a woman has to lead, God will design something for a woman to put me in this position. And as she is in this position, and that thing particularly changes, she would naturally go back to her natural state. All right. The whole thing that I'm talking about, what I just shared, is language. How the movement, what's making her move like this, and what's making her go back. Understanding that, get a deeper depth of that, getting a deeper depth of the language of God, because it's not audible usually. It's not verbal. The language of God is how things are moving. It's the strongest language. It's how he's moving. The letter Aleph is silent. It's the first representation of God. But the letter Aleph has movement. Its picture is an ox. Can you understand that an ox is generally silent? The positives of an ox, again, I say, when I wrote, we talked about it before, is humility, not a Christian humility. But an ox generally does not complain about its task. It does its task. It performs its task. Its main point is action. And it does not complain while it is acting. It acts and it tears up ground and it helps produce livelihood, whatever it does, and it does it willingly. It understands that life, if it doesn't do this, in essence, life will stop. And I'm not sure that an ox just has a brain, but hopefully you can follow. I know he has a brain, that process is like that, but there's its behaviors testify of this. That's what I'm saying. The strongest example of an ox is its behaviors, not what it expresses out of its mouth. All of the Hebrew letters have more to do with a behavior or movement, how God is moving. Its voice is stated in how it's moving more than what we hear in our ear. That is God. There are areas that as you're going through life, you can tell areas in your life when you're going off of the symptom. If we keep on doing this and you get an understanding of behavior, you get an understanding of movement, you get an understanding of that, you will be able to see areas where this goes into static, dynamic. Something that is dynamic is a behavior. Something that is static only uses words. So, for instance, I went to church today. Didn't go to church. I went to visit Herschel, and he was actually teaching, and he read the scripture, something that says, "Come unto me, all ye that are heavy laden," that scripture. And he got to the point where it says, "Take my yoke upon you." And he goes through that. And so I turned to Chauncey and I said, "What's a yoke? When you sat in church, did you ever understand what you were taking upon you? Or did you really have a clear picture of the yoke? What's a yoke? How do you take a yoke, his yoke upon you? How do you do it? Can you tell me?" His answer was, "I really don't have a clear picture. That's static. That's very static." Hebrew is way more active than that. You would not. So that yoke is a word, but it has way more movement, way more. It's power. So when you look at taking the yoke upon me, then you would look at Martin Luther King and you would say, that's the behavior of taking my yoke upon me. That's the behavior of it. It's very active, very dynamic. It's very action. That's the Hebrew. Give a summary of what we said.
A summary of what we're discussing and getting at, how to bring about order and how to see when things are out of order. I think that we were taught, those of us that were ever a part of the church, we were taught a very flimsy idea about seasons and the timing of God. And when you learn through the challenges of your day-to-day life how those seasons actually work, they're directional and they help you perceive what time we're in and what's necessary. In short, things are very out of order. It's a pendulum swing. But if we can continue to challenge the fabric of society and culture, we may be able to introduce and develop a new behavior and language.
I like that. Yeah, that's very good. Very good. Clear picture. And I think that was a very good summary. Each one of us have been prepared for a specific thing in a specific time. If you are still in a negative mindset from the things that you have experienced, you are not fully prepared to act with the movement of Yah, because those things that you experienced was to prepare you to act with his movement, where he moves and how he moves. That's what you find. And it's interesting that if you really understood James Baldwin, he had a strong voice, very, there was one point I didn't read to you, but he was talking about, I felt I was an ugly man. And I found out that I was not ugly, but I saw myself as ugly because of how they portrayed the nose and the lips of Black people. And this is how TV, entertainment, all of that, we were a laughing stock. And so that caused, making a long story short, James Baldwin had a powerful, this is baffling to me, he had a powerful power. They said he was probably one of the most impactful at that time for Black people. He was gay. How we would react to that. But what I got through that, when I first heard about James Baldwin being gay, it would make me want to write him off. What is the language of it? What's the language of him? I'm not justifying being gay, but what is the language of it? Nevertheless, his voice was very impactful, and God used him and prepared him for that moment, even though he was gay. And it was experiences that caused him to have such a strong voice. And no doubt, the reason why he was gay had more to do with his inability to accept who he was before he came to this mature state of speaking the way that he was. I don't know if that makes sense. God still spoke through him and used him. It's interesting how God sees things and how he operates and what he imputes on people. That is saying, and we are far from it, that says that this is a branch that I cut off and it deserves to be burned, and this is a branch that I prune so that it can be more powerful. Very interesting, and it's far different than what we generally do or see. I'll end with that. All right, you all have a good one, and we'll see what comes up next week.